To tell you my story now. I was working as a driver for Uber about a year ago. As you might guess, doing that job resulted in meeting many strange people. Many drunk people, quiet people, loud people, and in a few rare cases, creepy people. This story does not involve a creepy person. It involves my one and only terrifying person. One evening around 11 p.m., I was getting tired. I had worked for several hours and I had decided to pick up one more person and then call it a night and go home. This last person's pickup location was in a very bad, creepy neighborhood. I had dropped off another group of people here about a week before this night. I pulled up to the house set as the pickup location and immediately noticed it looked run down and vacant. It didn't look like somebody should or could be living in it. A man walked out of the house before I could even inform him on my phone that I had arrived. He looked normal, which was a huge relief. He got in the back and said hello and thanked me for picking him up. I asked where he needed to go, and he didn't give me the address like I'm used to. He instead told me to head down the street and make a right. I didn't think anything of this. After following his instructions, he told me to get on the freeway and go about 15 miles, and then get off on Lincoln Boulevard. I was happy to hear this, as it wasn't too far from where I lived, and this being my last ride for the night, I didn't want to drive a huge distance back to my house. After getting off on Lincoln, he told me to drive about 4 miles up and then make a right-hand turn. After he gave these directions, I started feeling a bit uneasy. After driving those 4 miles and making that right, he told me to make a left on Jefferson, a mile up the street. Upon hearing these instructions, I felt more nervous. He was giving me directions into my neighborhood. I followed instruction and made the left. I asked what next after this, and he didn't say anything for a few moments. I looked in the rearview mirror and my heart sank. He was staring at me with big, wide eyes. I repeated myself and he finally replied with, "Go about another mile and then make a left on Patterson." I can't tell you the level of fear I had reached after hearing that. That was the street that I lived on. Did this guy know where I lived? Was he directing me back to my house? My heart started to race. I made the left turn and then asked, "Next?" He responded immediately with, "Up the street here. My house is on the right." I felt sick. I kept driving and started to slow down a bit. I, without looking at it, passed my house slowly and said, "Which one?" He was silent. He responded in a very quiet and sinister voice, "You just passed it." I stopped the car, and my heart was now throbbing. I looked in the rearview mirror to see him smiling. I spoke. "Which one is it?" Still looking at him, he replied to me without breaking his gaze or his smile, 1905. I got out of the car immediately after hearing him say that. That was my address. I started backing up into the middle of the street. I took my phone from my pocket and called 911. He got out of the car on the opposite side of me. I backed up into my neighbor's bushes and made the choice to run and knock on their front door. I did, and after pounding for a moment, I turned around to see where he was, expecting to see him right behind me, but he was nowhere in sight. They answered the door, and I told them what just happened. A police officer showed up shortly after that, but the man was gone. Your guess is as good as mine how he knew where I lived. What my address was? I still have no idea. I didn't see him again. I never picked up another person after that. This happened about a month ago at the park near my house. I had taken my baby girl there in the afternoon. My baby loved the swings, so that was our first stop. While gently pushing my baby, a man walked into the park. There were other kids around and a few adults as well. I didn't feel threatened by this. The man wore blue jeans that looked quite old and a t-shirt with a bear on the front, or a wolf, I can't remember. He looked as if he had a mental disability of some kind, maybe autism? I wasn't sure. Anyway, he walked around the park looking at everything. The kids, the adults, the slides, everything. I went from feeling completely safe to completely unsafe when he spotted me and my baby girl. He started clapping his hands and laughing as if he was very happy to see us, and ran, and I mean literally ran over to us and stopped right outside the sand pit in which we and the swings were centered in. He laughed and smiled. He was staring at my baby. I said hello while forcing a smile. He ignored this and said, "Do you think she would let me hold her?" I responded with, no, she doesn't like people too much." A complete lie. I took her out of the swing and said, "We'll be on our way now. Have fun." The man stomped his foot and let out a sound of frustration, like when you tell a 6-year-old they can't have an ice cream cone at the fair. We walked home, and the man did not follow. This was minor, as I am coming to realize, but I guess you had to be there. It was very unnerving, and I got the distinct feeling that this man was not well, and that he was dangerous. Who knows what he would have done if I actually let him hold my baby. I have a very scary story to tell you. I was out of work and was desperate for cash when I looked on Craigslist under gigs a few years back. I responded to several ads, ranging from painting to helping people move and cleaning. On a Sunday morning, somebody called me and told me they had some work. They said the job was to clean a kitchen inside a small building that was recently closed down, and he was renovating it. He needed me to show up and work in the evening, starting at 7 and ending at like 1 or 2 in the morning, and that it was only for tonight, but he'd pay me cash $200. That sounded great to me, and I had no problem with these hours, as my last job was a graveyard shift anyways. So the man I was talking to gave me the address, and I told him I'd be there on time at 7 o'clock. He sounded like a normal, nice guy. I showed up a little before 7 and approached the building. This building was amongst many others downtown, but looked eerily lonely in the way that it had no windows and no lights were working outside in front of it. I thought it might be a bar that was closed down or something. I knocked on the big wooden door. I heard noise coming from inside, and eventually a man opened up. He was tall. He had a goatee and looked to be in his 50s. He greeted me with a smile and asked me to come on in. There was a single lamp lighting the room we were in, and it indeed looked like an old bar. The room wrapped around another smaller room in the center of it. It looked as if he was painting the walls and working to fix the top of the bar, which was rotting old wood. He showed me to the center room, which was the kitchen. The kitchen was very dirty. Old glasses and dishes were laying around. The oven was pulled from the wall, showing rotting drywall behind it. Sawdust and dirt was all over everything. He told me I was to clean this kitchen and to get as much done as possible before 2 a.m. I told him I'd work my ass off, and he pointed out some cleaning products sitting on the ground by the wall with some rags to scrub with. I asked if he had any gloves, and he said no, but that the sink in the corner still worked, and I could clean my hands when I wanted with that. That sucked, and I was a bit hesitant to clean some of the stuff in here without gloves, but I remembered that $200 he promised, and I moved past my disappointment. He told me while I was cleaning he was going to be working outside at the bar. I asked where I should begin, and he said scrubbing the baseboards around the room. I told him okay, and he walked out. Fast forwarding, I had been cleaning for about 2 hours, making a bit of progress, and I was getting very thirsty. I told myself I would finish this, then that, before exiting the room to ask if there was anything I could drink. I kicked myself for not thinking to bring a water bottle. After finishing my goal, I stood up, and I realized I had not heard him working outside the room at all. I hadn't heard anything, as a matter of fact. I walked to the door and opened it. To darkness. Complete pitch black. At that instant, I became very nervous and shouted out, "Hey man, I'm making some good progress in here," expecting to hear him respond. He didn't. I looked around, but seriously could not see anything. The lamp was gone. I looked back into the kitchen, which was bright and all lit up with all the lights on and working in the ceiling. I peered back out into the dark room. I began taking steps out into the room surrounding the kitchen. After taking about 10 whole steps, I stopped and was about to speak out again when, to my horror, the door slammed shut behind me and I was engulfed in blinding darkness. I could not see anything, and I spun around, waving my arms, walking back toward the kitchen door. My steps were small, as I did not know what was in front of me. I was afraid I would run into something. And I did. Waving my hands around in front of me, I hit something. Not a door. I hit somebody's face. I scuttled backwards, not hearing anything. Whoever I had just touched didn't react. I backed up until I hit the back wall, and I realized I must have been close to the entrance door to the building. I turned, and I felt around for the doorknob. Luck was on my side, as I quickly found it and pulled the door open. It was dark outside at this point, and only a very small amount of moonlight came into the room, just enough to where I could see the man standing against the kitchen door, with a blank expression on his face. I ran out the door and never looked back. That's the last time I used Craigslist to find work. What was that guy doing? What was he going to do? It makes me sick to think about it. I am a United States Postal Service employee, and this is by far the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. A coworker called in one day and said he couldn't make it to work for some reason. I was left with the responsibility of delivering all his mail on his route. I was not happy about this because his route involved going through the old town of the big city that I lived in. This old town was a tourist attraction of sorts. It had very old, Western-style buildings, and the street was a dirt road. All of the buildings within this old town were shops, mainly for tourists. Most of these buildings required the mail carrier to actually go inside and hand deliver the mail to the various shop owners, which took extra time and meant you had to converse with most of them, which I disliked doing for the most part. This one day, Late in the afternoon, I entered a building and was met with only a staircase. It was not an option to not deliver the mail, so of course, I descended the staircase, which was an old, winding metal staircase. It was uncomfortably long, and finally when I reached the bottom, I saw only a very long hallway with old light bulbs flickering above me. Along the hallway were doors on both sides, very similar to what you'd see in the hallway of a hotel. I paused for a second, not knowing what to do at this point, where to deliver the mail. A second later, at the end of the hall, I saw a man walk out one of the doors on the left and immediately enter another room on the right. I didn't have a chance to speak to him before he was gone. After standing there for a few seconds, I decided to walk down the hall. When I finally reached the end, I knocked on the door the man walked into. Nothing happened, and he didn't open up. Just then at the end of the hall, where I just came from, I saw the same man walk out of a door on the same side of the hall I was on. He walked into the middle of the hallway and stood there staring at me. I yelled out, I have some mail." He interrupted me by taking a long machete out from behind him. At first I thought this must be a joke, but when he started sprinting towards me, I decided it wasn't, and I entered the room I was at. The room was an old, dark wine cellar from the looks of it, and I immediately crawled underneath one of the old racks in which to store wine and thought this can't really be happening. It was, and the man entered the room searching for me. He walked past me and continued down the rows of wine racks while sniffling. I got out from underneath the rack I was under when I felt he was far enough away, and I went back out into the hall. I sprinted back down over to the staircase, and just as I hit the first metal step, ascending, I heard somebody running fast down the hall behind me. I skipped steps, going as fast as possible up the old staircase until I reached the top. I bursted outside onto the dirt road and looked behind me. The man did not go through the door. I got into my service vehicle and sped the hell away from the old town. I later told my boss about this, and he said he would look into it, and I shouldn't worry about it. I told him I'd never go there again, and he did not argue.